cloud. And there we go. We're now recording. So we're ready to go, I think. Apologies for the late start this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. My name is Todd. I'll be running today's session, as you know. I've just covered some of the housekeeping issues, or some of the housekeeping matters. If you'd be so kind as to keep your mics on mute. I will look forward to an option later on of a little bit of audience participation, and because it's distracting to monitor the chats as well as running the session. I don't have a co-host today. What I will do is just invite comments as and when by people unmuting themselves. First of all, I want to acknowledge the original residents of this land. I unfortunately don't know the tribe. I'm not sitting where I usually live, so I don't know the tribe, but I just want to acknowledge the original Aboriginal caretakers of this land and their leaders past, present, and emerging. And also kia ora to all the folks in New Zealand. I hope you had the chance, folks, to attend the opening ceremony, which is absolutely lovely. Some beautiful singing, and there's some great traditions in New Zealand that we don't have as much of here in Australia. So it was very nice to have that regional element added to it as well. I'm going to launch straight into it, I suppose. This is going to be a slightly more compacted version, and I didn't do a timed version of this before, so I suppose I'll get going. My intention is to talk for roughly half the time and then hopefully have some feedback as well. So today's exploration of scarcity and abundance is going to be, it's going to have a threefold goal. First of all, I'd like to share with you what I've learned from some recent lived experience, specifically related to these matters, but also some others that I've been looking at. My goal is to provide not the answers to anything, to sort of dispensing wisdom from on high. It's a bit misleading when they say lecture, because I'm definitely not going to sit here and talk at you the whole time, at least I hope. I do hope you'll get some useful takeaways from it as well. And also my goal ultimately is to start a conversation among interested parties in order to expand the overall pool of knowledge and practice in the community, which is one of the main reasons that the Solution Focused conferences happen. And I think is one of the strengths of the Solution Focused community, is that we're able to rely on each other and share knowledge. So I will just say as well, I've been fighting a stomach bug for about a week. So a previous version of me would have been absolutely dying of 1,000 deaths at how unpolished this presentation is. Also the fact that I don't have a presentation with slides and whatnot. I'm learning to put that behind me. As I'll speak about in more detail in a moment, I've also spent much of the last 5 months checked out in a sense. So this is my effort to get back on the bike a little bit and just shake off the rust, I suppose, and get back into the swing of things. They say that, I think it was Woody Allen said, 80% of success is just showing up. And if I'm perfectly honest, there's probably about 20 times this week when I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. I just feel like crap, and it's not going to be any value to anybody. So I want to think, sometimes it's easier just to say no and hide in bed basically. And I've seriously contemplated that, but what that means is I will be reading a lot of my presentation because I haven't had the chance to get it as polished as I might have liked. So I would like you to see this, I would invite you to see this as something of a work in progress, not, finished research and scientifically robust. I think there's a lot of other presentations that have a lot of that from some of the, great eminent practitioners throughout the world. I would present this, I suppose, as a counterpoint to that sort of thing. It's definitely not polished. It is more like a report from the lived experience front line from one of the walking wounded, if you will. I should just headline this by saying some trigger warnings. I will be potentially discussing things such as trauma, self-harm, suicide, abuse, addiction, mental illness, those topics. So if for any reason any of these subjects comes too close to home for you, by all means, feel free to disconnect from the process, to find whatever support you're able to get for yourself. I usually have somebody in a separate room. Perhaps go back to the plenary session if you need some support for anything like that. I also sometimes am pretty straightforward and pretty blunt sometimes. So some of the language might end up getting a little bit salty. My intention is not to offend anyone. I just tend to express myself pretty openly and directly. So if I say stuff that pisses you off, please don't be pissed off. It's just how I talk. Now, today's session is going to involve a lot of personal revelations and self-disclosing on my part. That's what I mean by lived experience. If it seems easy, if it comes across like it's easy for me to talk about this, I want to preface this by saying it really isn't. It's intensely confronting and hellishly embarrassing. But the alternative is bottling it up and keeping it inside. And I've learned that that's never a good formula for me, or indeed for anybody. So I've been living out loud a lot these last few months, if you will. And so this is a continuation of that, I suppose. Before we get into it, though, just a little introduction of who I am and why I'm here. My name is Todd Montgomery. I'm originally Canadian, living in Sydney's northern beaches these days, as you will have read in my bio. My involvement with solution focused goes back to 2002, when I first met Paul Z. Jackson at a conference in Toronto when I was living in Canada at the time. I then subsequently, and quite coincidentally, moved to England, to St. Albans, which happens to be where Paul also moved, not long after that, or maybe even the same time. And so in 2005, I got certified in the Solution Focused Pro program, which Paul was running at the time, I think with Mark, I'm not sure, I don't remember. But in any case, as happens in this community, both of us, both Mark and Paul, and of course the entire community, I got to know them, throughout Europe and the UK and so on. So I've been practicing for quite a while. When people have been saying, how would you rate your skill level? I usually say 7, but learning. So I don't present myself as an expert by any means. I think somebody put it really beautifully last night. I stayed up late last night, which is why I'm in a bit of a fog as well. But somebody put it very nicely that the closer you get to thinking you're a 10 in this, the more you realize how much you don't know. So with that, I wonder if in the comments, there's just a few of us here, but I wonder if in the comments you could just pop in a number, how you would rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is basically no familiarity with solution focus whatsoever, and 10 is I can do this stuff in my sleep. I'm a practitioner. I've basically written the book, and I'm pretty handy with it. So if you just pop a comment in the chats just to give me a sense of where folks are at, and I will strive to tailor my talk to that. While you're doing that, I'll launch right into it. So the context of today's chat is basically 5 months ago, my life disintegrated. My partner of 3.5 years broke up with me. That was in late February. And the time since then has without doubt been the hardest period of my entire life, because it wasn't just a messy breakup and, it's hard, but you'll get over it. In the period leading up to that, I came to realize my mental health had been deteriorating pretty dramatically. For months, probably even years. I was in what had become really an impossible situation. I was coping with it in the ways that a lot of people do, I suppose. So various kinds of addicted behaviors, eating crap food, too much booze. I had a pretty serious video gaming addiction, just a lot of stuff to just avoid dealing with what I knew was right in front of me. And in the end, of course, it led to the end of the relationship. At that point, I was very, very deep down the rabbit hole. I felt weak, worthless, undeserving of anything good in life, really lacking in confidence, ashamed of myself and my behavior that I conducted myself in the relationship. So with all of this happening in the lead up to the breakup and after, I effectively checked out of not only my business, I'm a self-employed consultant, but basically my life. I just wasn't there. And the result, when the breakup happened, my entire imagined future, as always happens with a breakup, disappeared. So I found myself alone, obviously, but also jobless, broke. My savings were practically non-existent because I hadn't been paying attention to the business. And as a one-man empire, that doesn't lead to good places financially. And because I was unable to find any place affordable to live, I was homeless. So I ended up for a couple of months living in a van and couch surfing with friends. It was a pretty bleak time. It was very much the survival mode. Initially, I was extremely fortunate to have reconnected with a friend that I'd known from the past. And so I had some skilled guidance and some help to get through those first couple of months. As a result of that, I really had some incredible insights into my life and my situation, things I would never otherwise have realized or examined. Somebody had a great phrase last night during the opening session. They said, a lot of people are walking around shame-saturated by previous traumatic experiences. And that was definitely me. There were things that happened in my childhood. I identified the lingering symptoms and behaviors that were the result of major past traumas. I don't know if you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences, but there's 10 of them that were identified in a study. The more of them you have, the more likely you are to end up incarcerated, engaging in addictive behaviors, depressed, suicidal, and so on. So, and with each one, it sort of goes up exponentially. I have 8 out of the 10. I experienced emotional abuse growing up. There was suicide in the family. On top of that, I previously divorced 10 years ago. So in my relationship track record hadn't been especially great. So everything sort of came together all at once. It was a perfect shitstorm, really. And I felt like I had fires burning in every room of the house. It was tough. And what happened was, for the first 2 months, I had this friend who was helping me out, and we were doing some healing breathwork journeys and just getting really centered and that sort of thing. And then he ended up leaving. He traveled interstate, and I was left to DIY the thing without a great deal of cash. I wasn't able to reach out to psychology or psychiatry help, and so really I had to DIY it. So for non-native English speakers, DIY stands for do it yourself. It's usually associated with doing repairs around the house and renovations, but in this case, my goal was to use the solution-focused tools that I've used with others for many years. And I found it really challenging. And that was the genesis of this session, really. I found it interesting last night. I stayed up to watch Evelyn Yanetsky's session on self-coaching last night. And I really admire her passion and her drive to bring solution-focused tools to people so they can use it for themselves. And she specifically mentioned sometimes people don't have enough money to get a coach or a therapist or what have you. And interestingly, the point also came up in that session that DIY only goes so far. And for issues of trauma and major emotional crisis, it's only going to get so far. I mean, solution focus did come out of the brief therapy. Solution focused brief therapy was, in fact, a therapeutic modality originally. And so there's an argument that, you could say that it's got chops, it's got credibility as far as dealing with these sorts of issues. However, doing it for myself is a phrase that I've used a couple of times. I don't know any dentist who fixes his own teeth. So you might have the skills, but using them on oneself can end up being pretty tricky. And there was a comment last night as well in the opening session. Actually, at the tail end of the session, the panel discussion that Paul said Jackson ran, he said, is it possible to DIY, to use solution focus for self-help for yourself? And there's only about 3 minutes left in the session, so not many people were able to chime in. But there was sort of because it was quick, people sort of said, yeah, I mean, the tools are pretty simple. And, once you get the hang of it, you find that a virtuous spiral emerges and you're able to apply these things to yourself. And I agree to a point. The thing is that at the very moment when you most need them, sometimes, well, in my experience, the very moment that I most needed them was the same moment that it was hardest to access that, because I was in a very dark place. My mind was not natively attuned to thinking that way. In fact, and this brings me neatly to the subject of scarcity. I was in survival mode the first couple of months. Things were really dire. And I say that just off the cuff right now. I mean, it was hard. I was waking up cold sweats in the dead of night, waking up racked with anxiety first thing in the morning, as you do after a breakup, but especially with everything else going on. And I also noticed, one of the things I noticed is when we moved out of the place and divided up the stuff, that I never thought of myself as a hoarder, someone who engages in hoardings. I didn't have, thousands of magazines piled up in the corner, but I did, because I didn't have a place to live at the time, I had to get rid of a lot of stuff. And I just found that intensely confronting and actually traumatic. And I noticed that, scarcity mentality, like hoarding, is the opposite of abundance. It's a scarcity mentality fueled approach to life that just says, I don't have enough. Just the concept of giving things away, even things I hadn't even looked at in like 4 years, freaked me out. And I realized after the fact that it's really just a poverty mindset. It compelled me to believe that I need to keep this stuff, because the battle cry of the hoarder is always, I might have a use for that someday. And in reality, it was just, I was scared that I would never be able to afford another one, so I had to hang on to everything. And this really brought into focus how much my mind was focused on the scarcity mentality. And again, I'm not alone in this. Scarcity is hardwired into us in a lot of ways. We have this lightning quick limbic system that's very sensitive to any lack and any, growing up, evolving millions of years ago, we weren't blessed with abundance. When you found food, you ate as much of it as you could, and you were constantly on the lookout for dangers and so on. So our very quick limbic system is the legacy of that, our emotional fight, flight, freeze response. Whereas the prefrontal cortex that helps us do really clever things is much more cumbersome and much slower. there's a real negativity bias in the brain that, repeated exposure to these sorts of things increases our sensitivity to it. So the more lack there is, the more we look out for lack, the less stuff we have, the more we're afraid of losing any of it, which is the core of a hoarding mentality, but also just also the basis of consumerism. Convincing people that they don't have enough and they aren't enough is a terrific way to keep the engine of capitalism running, because you always have to have more and there's always desire. This is, of course, related as well to the Buddhist concept of attachment, which can be alternatively translated from the Sanskrit, I think it is, as drive or craving. And I think instead of attachment, craving sort of captures it a little bit better. Something's missing, something's wrong. There might be abundance in our world, and obviously there is. We have food to eat every day for the most part. There's a lot of things, but we don't focus on the things we have. We focus on the lack and the things that are missing a lot of the time. We have brains that are sensitized to loss much more than gain. And I don't know, if you can be told 10 great things and one bad thing, and of course your mind goes to the bad thing every time. There's a great phrase that our brains are Teflon for compliments, they slide right off, but Velcro for criticisms, which tend to stick and stay there for a long time. So the scarcity mindset, I mentioned it in my description of the session. Scarcity is stressful, while abundance is healing and nurturing and resilience promoting, and I'll get to that in a moment. So if abundance is so good, why don't we do it? Well, it's because of this scarcity mentality. And I'm not natively, a mindless optimist. I don't naturally look on the bright side of things. I remember Jenny Clark, who of course is one of the grand the grand eminence in the field, said some years ago at a Solution Focus conference, because I do Solution Focus doesn't mean I automatically think that way. Quite the opposite. I do Solution Focus because I often don't think that way, and I'm not natively, that's not where my brain goes immediately. And I think that's a very widespread thing with people. So Solution Focus I see as a very helpful habit to get into and a useful corrective. So, in fact, I have a massive inner critic. I have a vicious perfectionist streak. And so as a counterbalance to that, as a counterbalance to this concept of missing and want and lack and contraction and possessiveness and focusing on physical survival, even though there are no saber-toothed tigers in the bathroom, there are no immediate threats. We are hardwired to respond that way, to have this heightened sense of threats in our environment. And a real mistrust of others as well. It's profoundly isolating from others when we think there's not enough to go around. If you have more, I'll have less. So the more experiences we have of this, and of course society tends to reinforce it in a lot of ways, the more we just live in this constant, fearful scarcity state. By contrast, abundance has this sense of enough, right? So it leads to a feeling of expansion and openness and outward focus and a shift into perspective from the here and now to the bigger picture. It leads to a sense of generosity, a more generous attitude, more relaxed, more, I have enough. I'm happy to share with you. It's more of an approach mentality rather than an avoidance mentality, right? So focusing on what's good and, what's good and what the opportunities are rather than what's bad and standing in the way. This approach mentality, this concept of abundance is profoundly good. There's plenty of studies that talk about it's good for your physical and mental health, for your outlook on life, for your long-term, spiritual well-being. And you'll probably, if you know anything about the solution focus approach, or as you get to know more about it, I know we have a wide range of experience or expertise here. As you get to know more about it, you'll realize, yeah, it is about focusing on what you do have and what you want and what's working and what the resources are, and rather than the barriers, the obstacles, all that sort of thing. So scarcity is really a fearful state. And what I found interesting in this process the last 5 months of doing a lot of research and self-work and so on, when I say DIY, I really DIY'd this thing. I did a lot of stuff on my own. Thankfully, I'm inclined that way, and I do have some of the tools. But I noticed that the opposite of fear is actually not courage or bravery. The opposite of fear is actually love. That was a pretty profound, I got that insight from a friend of mine, John. And, so often I think, for me, often my default state is being anxious. And so much so that if I'm not anxious about something and worried about something, I get worried about the fact that I'm not worried about something. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, but it's pretty common and widespread as well. But shifting the focus to abundance, I've learned to be more on my own side, to express self-compassion, to even be kind toward myself. I gave myself a pretty good caning immediately after the breakup, and took all the responsibility on myself. And over time, I gave myself a bit of a break and realized, there's two people involved. And it wasn't just the breakup, as I mentioned. There was a lot of stuff that I just hadn't dealt with over the course of years, and it all the chickens came home to roost. And so I just acknowledged, that's just where I am. And so one of the things that we can do to anchor abundance is, of course, having a solution focused outlook, which does shift more towards that approach mentality, that possibility mentality. And also, when things are good, just notice that they're good and just go, yeah, I think things are all right now. Like I've got a roof over my head. I'm warm enough. It's winter in Australia and we're having a bad one. For a Canadian, not bad, but not enjoyable. It's wet and it's horrible a lot of the time. So just noticing, things are okay right now. Abraham Lincoln famously said, people are just about as happy as they make up their minds to be. And I think there's a lot to that as far as noticing where you put your attention. Certainly a solution focused approach advocates noticing where you place your attention and where you place your energy. So this brings me to the next topic, which what I would call, and has come to be known, I think in the last 5 years or so, 10 years maybe, toxic positivity. So there's certain self-help personality types, I'll say, and even certain communities. I would go so far as to say Byron Bay in Australia, for example, comes to mind. And the general mood and the general approach seems to be, good vibes only, man. Like, you need to attune your vibrational frequency to the universe, and then it'll manifest abundance for you. And you can tell from the way that I'm describing this, I don't ascribe a lot of usefulness to it. I think it's, the Secret brought us the whole law of attraction with all of its quasi scientific quantum stuff. And basically, if you just sit and want something badly enough, as I understand the tenet of it, the universe will just bring it to you as long as your vibrational frequency is right. And from my perspective, that's all well and good. And you definitely should pay attention to where you're placing your focus. Certainly, that's been a key part of the challenge that I've had the last little while. You also need to get off your ass and do something, right? So if you just sit there, it's the ultimate self-entitlement approach, in my view. So just sitting there and waiting for stuff to arrive to you doesn't usually achieve much. And in fact, a great phrase that I've heard is the antidote to anxiety is action. So rather than sitting and stewing and waiting and fearing, or sitting and waiting and expecting things to be delivered, just, do something about it. Now I'm conscious through my, 20 years of familiarity and use of solution focus. Some people tend to tar a solution focus approach with the same brush. It's sort of happy la la. Oh, you don't want to talk about problems. It's only good stuff. La la la. I don't want to hear about the bad things. So it's Pollyanna thinking. It's the things are for the best in this best of all possible worlds. And one of the thing that keeps coming up in the practice is it's not meant to be problem phobic. We don't want to deny problems exist. And of course, much more talented practitioners than I have expressed this much more clearly. But the point is just to get far enough down the path so we know what we're talking about in order to then identify, to turn the corner rather than dwelling, as often happens because misery loves company. Turn the corner and be able to say, well, okay, so given that situation and that sounds really tough, what do you want to have happen? And just shift towards that, because that activates, that shuts down, or it disengages the lizard brain, the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, and actually engages the prefrontal cortex, because you're asking, this is a question that requires rational thought as opposed to fearful emotional reactivity. As a colleague of mine in Montreal, Fletcher Peacock, famously wrote the book that he entitled Water the Flowers, Not the Weeds. Right, so just notice where you're placing attention. Because for me, toxic positivity is ultimately, and not just for me, there's a lot of research into this as well, ultimately, it's a denial of reality, to deny that life has its share of disappointments, frustrations, losses, hurts, setbacks, sadness, suffering. It's unrealistic and untenable to think that you can just deny an entire portion of the wide spectrum of human emotion just because you don't like thinking about it. So the good vibes only tribe really kind of, I think, has it a bit wrong. And what I notice is the under the surface, I had a conflict with someone from that tribe recently, and I just noticed that just barely concealed under the surface was this simmering rage, because those emotions were not being expressed. They weren't being acknowledged. Now, do you want to walk around and just lash out at people? Of course not. There's productive and useful ways. Nonviolent communication, otherwise known as compassionate communication, I think is a great modality for expressing, sometimes quite difficult things in a way that is still engaging with the person. In any case, I'm getting a bit tangential. So, no amount of positive thinking only is going to change the truth that, life does fire, curveballs your way. And my practice is called Positive Change Works. And yes, I'd like to keep focused on the positive, but not to the exclusion of. So another thing I've learned is that resilience really only results when you face adversity. I have learned an unbelievable amount about myself, about how fortunate I am with the people I have around me. The challenging feedback. There's not much more challenging feedback than somebody breaking up with you and basically saying, I don't want to be with you. My mind goes immediately to, I'm not good enough. And that's tough. So engaging with that in ways that make sense has been a hell of a learning journey. In this context, I'll mention as well, Viktor Frankl, of course, famously the psychotherapist survivor of the concentration camps. He came up with the concept of tragic optimism. So it's acknowledging, it's a search for meaning. He wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning. A search for meaning amid the inevitable tragedies of human existence. So acknowledging that they're there and finding meaning anyways. And I'm not going to compare my situation with something as a lot of my stuff is first world problems, and it's just, a mess that I've created in my own head. It's certainly not, the life-threatening situations that are happening so often to so many people around the world. The point that Frankl makes is identify the things that you can fix and do something about them. And the things that you can't fix, a terminal illness, for example, or a breakup that, I didn't want to be broken up with, but there it was. It's just accept what's unfixable and make meaning out of that as well, and somehow make, sense out of it. There's another concept to bring up in this context of post-traumatic growth. So we hear about PTSD all the time. We don't often get the focus placed on there's growth potential to be had in there as well. Not at all downplaying the suffering. That's not what this is about, or denying that it happened, but actually to use it in a way. I sometimes say, I've been seriously deep in the shit the last couple of months, but I'm trying to use it as fertilizer, for some insights and for some good, for some growth to happen. That's what fertilizer does, right? It helps things grow. So people will grow in many ways from difficult times, greater appreciation of life and relationships, and the many fortunate ways that we're blessed with things in life. Also, discovering personal strengths, like a well of strength and resilience and resourcefulness, which is profoundly solution focused as well. What do you have? What can you rely on? Even in survival mode, I could say, well, at least I have a van to sleep in, and I have people around me, and I'm not going hungry, and my physical health was actually quite good. And so having that attitude of gratitude as well, because it's not really the traumatic event itself that leads to the growth. It's the way you handle it. And as Hamlet famously said, nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So paying attention to one's attitude and where the emphasis is being placed is where the growth potential really lies. So I suppose what I'm arguing for, in contrast to this skewed end of things with a toxic positivity and the good vibes only crew, I think solution focus offers a great opportunity to find a middle ground, what I would call practical abundance. Right, so it's grounded in reality. It acknowledges that life can be pretty shit sometimes. Not lying to yourself about the truth of life. There are tragic events. Life is unfair and bloody crap some of the times. But using abundance as a tool to actually just get more centered and calmer and collected and whole and in a better frame of mind to be able to deal with the unfairness and the difficulties, and also to identify the things that are available and are open to you. Pushing back against the natural inclination that our brain has to just lean towards scarcity so often. So it's sort of putting a finger on the scale on the one side to compensate for the fact that our brain naturally skews towards negativity a lot of the time and scarcity mentality. And we have a society that reinforces that in a lot of ways. So just sort of saying, well, let's just get a little more balanced perspective. And I think in my practice of solution focus and where I've seen really skilled practitioners as well, that's one of the best services I think it can offer to others, and I think to ourselves. So heightening awareness and seeing possibilities, really. So how does this apply to solution focus? Well, as I mentioned, the tools that are inherent in SF, they're sort of naturally skewed towards this sort of thing anyways, to putting that finger on the scale in useful ways. I'll share with you a short story about, as I explored, the frustration I had was I have these tools, but it's really hard to use them on myself in a lot of ways. So I'll share a short story with you. When the breakup happened, my upstairs neighbor was just a tremendously supportive fellow. And at one point he was going on a road trip. He was driving from Sydney 9 hours up to Gold Coast in Queensland. And so I said, I would love to come along. I got to get the hell out of here. I need a change in surroundings. Now, as you can tell, I like to talk in all contexts, not just when I have the microphone. And in the 9 hours we drove, I think we spoke for 8 of them, because he obviously likes to talk as well. Towards the end of it, he'd more or less said, I've got these questions about my business. I don't know if it's the field I want to be in. I've sort of gone back to something I did years ago. I'm not sure if it's a good fit. So I sort of engaged with him. And what ended up happening was this sort of live coaching session on the road in the context of 2 guys on a road trip. We loaded up on junk food. We were eating all that and just having the whole road trip experience. And what came out of it was I was asking him questions like, well, if you just look at your business and think, is this the right business? That's probably not going to, you're going to come up with all the pros and cons and upsides and downsides. What I think I need, what might be useful is to raise the perspective. So what's the point on the horizon that you want to get to? And does this business help you get there? Is it pointed in that direction, or is it actually not? Or is it the thing you need to do for now that might get you there, might lead to the next thing that gets you there? Right. So just raise the perspective a little bit. And I proceeded to, he thought that was a really good question and came out with some answers that he found useful and helpful for his context. And what I noticed was, as I continued to ask him questions, I was answering the same questions in my own mind. And so the way that I sort of made sense of it after the fact was, if I see solution focused tools as like a tennis racket, batting them back and forth with someone else, in a coaching session or what have you, is the way it often works, and works really well. You sort of get that interplay, you get perspectives you wouldn't be able to have, certainly perspectives I didn't have in my own mind, I could get from somebody else and their feedback. Sometimes though, you can take a tennis racket and bat, the ball against the wall. So when I was talking to him, even though we were talking about his situation, it was like playing tennis with somebody else. But other situations, just by talking out loud about my situation, a friend of mine calls it exo-processing. So believe it or not, by nature, I'm actually introverted, just on the cusp, but I do find this sort of thing terrifying, by the way. So I appreciate your presence today. I'm glad somebody showed up, basically. Got a little hairy at the beginning there. But exo-processing is someone who, whether they're introverted or extroverted, tends to think things through out loud, tends to talk it through out loud, like extroverts do. And so in this process of speaking to him, and also of just talking to my friends almost endlessly, as people do after they've had a painful breakup, I noticed that I was able to use the tools in a sort of sneaky, sort of a sneaky, indirect kind of way. And of course, what were the tools that were most helpful? Well, it's the classic solution focus. What do I want? Given that this is my new reality, where do I want to be going? What do I want to have happen? As opposed to, focusing on what went wrong and I miss, we had 2 dogs. I now don't have the dogs. That was extremely painful. So looking forward to the future that I'm looking for. And also, what are my best hopes? I have said many times, when I come out of this thing, man, it's been painful and confronting and instructive and learning, a tremendous period of learning and growth and so on. But it's also been really crap. So when I come out the other side, I'm going to have some real stories to tell and some, a few things to say about resilience based on my own experience. And so I think today was a good moment in the solution focused community, which I was very keen to reconnect with after this period of fallow that really I've been checked out for a couple of years now. And so I thought, what better place to reconnect with people who understand this stuff really well, who are profoundly supportive, some of whom I know from, back in the day, and obviously to be able to reconnect with other people as well. That was the goal today. Is just I've been taking in a lot of information, thinking about a lot of stuff. So if I have a bit of, verbal diarrhea today, it's because it's exciting for me to be able to distill this down and clarify my thinking a little bit. I will be looking to turn this into something a little more structured down the road. So yeah, what are the best hopes for what I would like to have as an outcome? Focusing on resources. And the same friend I mentioned before, John, famously, when I would get really twitchy and would go back to dwelling and ruminating on the relationship, he would say, show gratitude, and just try and encourage me to switch my mentality to, yeah, just what do I have as opposed to what I don't have. And I mean, I know this stuff, and you guys know this stuff. Solution focus, anybody who's come within contact with solution focus for 5 minutes knows this stuff. It is a simple process, not easy, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And yet it's so easy to forget, especially in that context. In scaling tools, I found really helpful to be in the now and remain mindful and present moment focused, rather than looking ahead to an anxiety-ridden future that I was imagining, or looking back to a regret-filled past. Just stay right here and now, and get in contact with my gut in a lot of ways. So when I say I've looked at a lot of different topics in the last few months, I had a re-examination of my values in a pretty big way. It's a profound focus on gratitude as well. And I think the main thing in the first couple of months was just really embodiment. And I purposely put the word body in the middle there. Just getting back in touch, because, the head naturally tells stories and can be very focused on revving up anxiety and possibilities and catastrophizing. And the heart often gets attached to the past and has lots of regret. But I think the body doesn't lie. What's his name? The fellow who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, Wim van der Kolk, I think his name is, has years of research, which I highly recommend looking into, of just, how much of this stuff is stored in the body and how getting it out. For me, it's surfing. Hence I have the Surfing Saved My Life project as a modality. I'm not looking to teach everybody to surf, although it is pretty fun, but just getting people connected with what brings meaning and purpose and passion to their lives, really. So on the subject of meaning and purpose, Nietzsche, one of my favorite quotes comes from Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." And that why can be just so tricky, because in this day and age in particular, people are profoundly disconnected from themselves, from others. They talk about a loneliness epidemic in the States, which led to the opioid epidemic, which led to an overdose epidemic. There's record levels of mental distress, mental illness, profound alienation from one another. Now, the world's in a pretty tough state, and it's being reflected in people's bodies and minds. And my own experience of this is, I mentioned the brain in particular. Solution focus can be quite an intellectual process in a lot of ways. It involves imagination, it involves answering questions, it involves thinking things through. And this part of our brain, the front part, it's the clever part. We want to be using that to sort out things in life and to make sense of things. I suppose it's also, I found it really useful to also connect the body and get centered and grounded, because my mind, I'm a great storyteller. My brain can tell stories. A lot of my career has depended on that strength, and I think it's one of the things that I add value to situations by doing. I have to be really careful what stories I tell myself, though, because they can, especially in the context of some emotional turmoil lately, they can go down some very dark corridors and lead to not great places. So rumination, that great phrase, 3 great ways to deal with rumination. When I get stuck in my rut and I'm like, oh, relationship's gone, everything's disappeared and so on, or whatever we ruminate about. Oh, I can't believe I said something so stupid yesterday, or the many things that we sit and stew and worry about, driven often by a combination of perfectionism and shame. Brene Brown has amazing work on this, particularly just not feeling good enough, and so we beat ourselves up. This rumination, there's 3 ways to shortcut it, and one of them is just get out in nature, just focus on something bigger than yourself. The second one is just mindfulness, get very present in the moment and get in contact, place both feet squarely on the floor and feel how grounded you are, feel, your butt on the chair, and focus on your breathing. Breath work has been an enormously important part of the process for me. And just notice, in particular, clinical psychologist Rick Hansen has done great work in this. And he has a phrase, you're all right now. Just bring everything back to, this is a profoundly solution-focused view, I think, of just, you're okay right now, you're fine, and that just is really centering and grounding. And it, to me, puts me in the mentality to be able to more effectively use the solution-focused tools. So upshot, 9 things I think that I've applied pretty successfully to managing this situation, and I know I'm going to be incorporating in my practice, and I can recommend to anybody dealing with adversity or mental distress. Self-care, first of all, sleep, eat right and exercise, breath work, as I've mentioned. The inward journey, the inward aspects, mindfulness, gratitude in particular, having an attitude of gratitude, and just learning, focusing on the learning and the growth that will come out of this admittedly really crap situation. And then the outward focus as well also has 3 aspects to it that I found useful: focusing on relationships, acts of service. One of the first things that happened after the breakup was I realized that I had just been so focused on myself, the relationship, my world. And one of the first things I wanted to do was reach out and be of service to others. So I connected with a lot of men's groups here in the Northern Beaches and just put myself out there, really. And that in turn leads to the third part of the outward bit, which is, and in a way it brings it full circle, the sense of purpose that you can have, which leads to your sense of meaning in life. And I think, we talk about loneliness, addiction, mental distress. I would link almost all of those things back to people having no sense of meaning. And that is tragic. It's also encouragingly it's in our gift to find and make sense of our own lives and attribute the meaning to it, because there is no inherent meaning to anything. It's the significance we attach to it. And so while we're telling these stories, we can tell the story of our life, one that has meaning and will make sense to us. Right, we're coming up to time. I unfortunately haven't left much space for you guys to chime in, and I've just sort of hogged the mic a little bit, so sorry about that. As I mentioned, I hope that this has been the other end of the spectrum. It's been very lived experience, very self-disclosing, very self-indulgent, maybe even. I wasn't looking for this to be a therapy session. What I wanted to do is just share what I've been going through and some of the insights related to solution focus that I've gained from it. Like I said, it's not easy. It may seem like I just talk about this stuff. It's not easy. It's taken me months to get to the point where I can talk about these things. At the same time, it's really important. So part of the solution focus project is, thank you, Simon, for the comment. Part of the solution focus project, I call it a positive change story because it links to Positive Change Works. So that's sort of the corporate version of this other, social enterprise. And it's about, first of all, modeling the behavior that I'm encouraging others to do, which is opening up. The loneliness epidemic, addiction, spiraling rates of suicide, particularly among men in Australia, it's just because so much gets bottled up and it's got nowhere else to go. And it sometimes leads to really tragic circumstances. Everyone today has high levels of distress and even mental illness, diagnosed and otherwise. And I think this ability to express it and to craft different stories. The irony is we have the tool in our own hands. I have solution-focused tools in my hands. We all have the pen to write the story of our own lives and experiences. And so often it's just we're disconnected from it because we distract ourselves, we avoid it somehow. And so I feel like I'm going in circles now. So more than ever, I would say, I would advocate, and that's what my project is about, and that's what these kind of talks are about, and indeed the entire conference is about. More than ever, people need to talk about stuff and to be able to reach out. I can also tell you from firsthand experience, and if you know about it, you may know as well, the system is profoundly broken. And so my ultimate intention with today and with my work and with the solution focused community and my involvement with it is solution focus has enormous potential to help with these situations. Not necessarily as a therapeutic modality, but just to, shift people's perspective in a lot of ways. We need to get solutions focus into the hands of as many people as possible. I've said that for 20 years now. And I'm always encouraged by the work that people are doing to make that happen. Again, it's simple, but it's not easy. And so putting it in people's hands and sort of assuming, oh, they'll get it and they'll just run with it. Sometimes there's a lot of challenges there. And so it's worth acknowledging that our brain does tilt naturally towards that scarcity side and remind ourselves, okay, sometimes we need to correct for that. Because often the very moment that I needed solution focus the most is the moment that I was least equipped to be able to do it. So my objectives were threefold today. I wanted to share what I learned from my lived experiences. Thank you for your kind attention and support. I wanted to provide not the answers, but some takeaways. If you could, in the moments that we have before you head off to your next session, if you had an aha moment, you found anything particularly useful today or insightful, or there's something you want to go away and think about, if you could just write something in the chat section, that would be really helpful for me to understand how this landed. Normally, I would, I hate lecturing because you don't learn as much from lecturing as you do by talking about it. So any kind of feedback you give me, I would have normally sought that out live, but we're unfortunately going to run out of time. So anything you put in the chat section, that would be tremendous feedback. Also, I'll pop my email address in there. You can get a hold of me there. It's also in the program. You can find my email address. If you wanted to follow, Surfing Saved My Life, Solutions Saved My Life too, but Surfing Saved My Life on Facebook or Instagram. The website's unfortunately down at the moment, working on that. And my third one was to start a conversation among interested parties to expand the pool of knowledge and practice of solution focus for, for DIY, for all kinds of applications. I don't have a clear notion of how to do that, but gosh, I think it would be a great thing to do. So again, I would invite you to connect either through surfingsavemylife@gmail.com, also todd@gmail.com. Either of those I'm very open to. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's keep the ball rolling. I like to, I've sort of punted this in the air in a pretty personally terrifying and quite, revelatory way. And my hope is that it'll land in somebody's hands who'll say, yeah, this is a conversation worth continuing. So bang, 12:25. That's my presentation for the day. Thank you so much. Anybody who wants to throw a comment in the dwindling moments of the session, by all means, unmute yourselves and chuck comments in the chat if you'd like, but also if you just wanted to give me the live version, I'd be most grateful of that as well. Thank you so much. And also I want to thank all the organizers, volunteers, and all the, surely we're standing on the shoulders of giants with, the people who've been doing this for a long time and remain so generous in sharing what they know. So I want to acknowledge all them in closing. Thanks, guys. That's me. Okay, just looking at the chat now. Right, the childhood trauma experiences, it's ACEs is what they're called, adverse childhood experiences. Just pop it into Google and it'll bring up all the research and yeah, all the relevant bits. So ACEs, Alpha Charlie Echo. Thank you for your kind words. Self-hypnosis for self-growth. No, I don't, Hector. Interesting, I'll have to look into it. Yeah, given you guys are relatively early in your solution focused journey, I'm just looking at Pang's comment. The more that I've used the tools, the more I find they have applicability pretty much everywhere, and especially the way that you can sort of stealth use them in conversations to just slightly bias the conversation towards something that's more of an approach mentality, something that's a little bit more productive and constructive in a lot of ways. And without using, I tend to shy away from pejorative language, good, bad, right or wrong. It just is. And the question is, does it help you get to where you want to go? One of the phrases I love to use is, what do you want? In fact, it was on the back of my business card for a long time. And I think solution focus is really one of the most powerful tools to be able to identify it in a straightforward, lightweight process and just get things happening. Excellent, there we go. Okay, I'm going to stay on here for a little bit. If you want to hang around for a bit, I'm happy to chat. I'm going to probably stop the recording there, though. So I'll just say in closing, thank you again. And I hope you got some benefit out of it today. And it's been a pleasure being able to talk it through. I appreciate you allowing me to exo process these things. And yeah, I look forward to continuing the conversation in one way or another. So thanks, everyone. See ya. And